Hello everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election and my updated prediction for where we would stand if the election were to be held tomorrow. So this is just another kind of routine check-in on where I view the American electorate to be as of right now. Not a ton has changed, but Biden has officially announced, and it's been a few months. So there's a lot that I think is important to talk about here. So let's just get right into it here. There's obviously a good amount of states that are going to be safe for President Biden. These are states he's likely to win by upwards of 15%. Wow, I can't click today, but there's not much to say about these states. These, again, will not be competitive and are thus not really worth taking a look at just for the sake of time. So Biden, 191 safe electoral votes. Trump, going to be a bit less, but still a good amount of safe electoral votes. I'll characterize some likely states as safe because I really don't think that there's much debate there. These are states like Kansas, Iowa, South Carolina, and the 2nd District of Maine. For Biden, I'll do the same in states like New Mexico, Nebraska 2nd, New Hampshire, and Virginia. And so that leaves a bit more of a select battleground, but there are a couple more likely states I want to add. Just these are likely states that I think are on the lower edge of likely and closer to lean than they are to safe. And so for me, the best place to start there would be Minnesota. Minnesota is really interesting because Biden did really well there in 2020. Not a lot of people thought he was going to do well. Obviously, he was expected to win it by a decent margin, but a lot of polls showed it within a couple of points, especially in September of 2020, and he ended up winning it by over 7. So it was not close in 2020, and I think that based on the results we saw from the midterms last month, it would be fair to view Minnesota as a non-competitive state. The only reason I'm talking about it here is because I think it's important to look at just because it is a Rust Belt state, and I think Trump would do better in the rural areas. But again, Biden likely to win it by close to 7 or 8, like he did in 2020. And that would leave us with our likely Trump states. There's only really one of these I want to talk about, actually. It's Ohio. And Ohio is interesting because Ohio has a Senate race, and Ohio 2024 is going to be important if Democrats want to maintain their Senate majority because Sherrod Brown is their incumbent there. And so you would expect Democrats to fund Brown's campaign. Obviously, he's going to be in a tough race, but they're obviously not going to surrender or wave the white flag immediately. That is important for Biden because it means that he will have to try not to get blown out in the state. No one thinks Biden can win, or no one smart thinks Biden can win Ohio. But the fact of the matter is that Democrats are really in need of a good result in Ohio from Biden to create a smaller gap for Brown to overcome. And so if Biden loses Ohio by a bit less than people are expecting, you could easily see Sherrod Brown getting reelected just because Biden did better than expected. So Trump will win Ohio, but I think it's going to be to an extent closer than people think, and I think Biden will actively try to not get totally destroyed in the state, which is why it'll be interesting to watch, but not necessarily competitive. Now, these remaining states, I think, are all somewhat competitive. I think some are more competitive than others. A good state to start off with is Michigan because I don't really think Trump has a realistic chance of winning it. I don't think he's going to target it, and I don't think that there is any reason for him to target it because the Republicans, if you recall, last November, lost every competitive House race, and they also surrendered the Attorney General position and or I shouldn't say surrendered, but they lost it. They didn't hold it, but they lost the Attorney General position and the Secretary of State position by landslide margins. Governor Gretchen Whitmer was reelected despite Republicans really thinking they had a chance to unseat her. And on top of that, Democrats just hammered them at the state level. They won back the state legislature for the first time since the 1980s. So Michigan looking really good for Democrats right now. Joe Biden, I think you'd expect him to perform very well in the suburbs, especially in areas like Grand Rapids and Detroit. So to me, Michigan, not really on the board for President Trump or for Donald Trump right now, but certainly I guess something to watch because it will be under 5%. At least I think it will be. Florida is kind of the reverse Michigan. I think it's going to be a bit less competitive, but Trump should still win it. The reason I think it's under 5 is because Trump's going to underperform in the suburbs. He'll do very well in Miami-Dade as he did last time, but he's not going to do well in Jacksonville. He's not going to do well in Tampa. These are more educated areas. These are areas that have more moderate voters. And they were very good for Ron DeSantis and Marco Rubio in November, but they're not going to be good for Trump. Trump performed pretty poorly in both these areas in 2020, and these are, in general, left-trending areas. They did not trend left last year, but again, Democrats had a disastrous turnout in November of last year, so I think that's kind of an unfair metric. Either way, I expect Biden to lose pretty decisively in Florida, but by 5 or 6 points instead of 10 points. The next state I want to characterize here is Texas. Texas, again, is not too competitive. I think it's going to be closer than Florida, which will be significant, but Biden does not have a realistic chance of winning Texas, and it doesn't really help him. What I mean by that is if he's winning Texas, he'd have to be doing really well nationwide, because you don't win Texas and do really poorly everywhere else. Results are correlated. You win Texas, right, and if you're winning Texas, you're probably winning a lot of other states that you wouldn't otherwise be winning. So if he's won Texas, he's already, has won the Rust Belt. He's probably won North Carolina, Georgia, and he's probably close in Florida. And he's already won Nevada and Arizona. So there is no scenario in which Texas is the state that gets Biden 270, so realistically, there's no reason for him to target it. There is a Senate race there, which is why I think he's going to invest into it, but it's not a state that he needs to have. So I would expect Democrats to do better than they did in 2020. Biden lost by 5.5 in 2020, so it's significant in that it will likely trend to the left again. But again, Biden is going to struggle with Hispanics. We know this. He struggled in 2020, and I think he could do better in some regions, but the Rio Grande Valley is not an area where he's going to do particularly well. It's rural, very uneducated in terms of college degrees, and it's likely to see more of a trend to the right than most other areas. So I think Texas, at this point, not looking good for Biden. He could win it, but he would need a Herculean performance in the suburbs of Dallas and Austin to do that, and I think not the most likely outcome at this point in time. Similarly, I guess you could say on the flip side, Trump is looking pretty bad in Pennsylvania right now. It's a state that he won in 2016, that he came close to winning in 2020, but since then things have gotten worse for the GOP. They lost their Senate seat there in 2022 by a pretty decisive margin, and we also saw Republicans fail to make any inroads anywhere. Fetterman outran Biden in like all but one county. He did like half a point worse in like one random county. I think it was Pike County, which is on the border of New York, and it's in the New York media market, but more importantly, Fetterman did really well in the suburbs, and he was supposed to be doing poorly in the suburbs. Almost everyone expected him to underperform Biden in Chester County, but he did exactly the same as Biden. He won it by 17. And if John Fetterman, in a Senate race, which is a more down-ballot race than obviously a presidential race, is running equal with Joe Biden, Trump's going to do horrible in Chester County and in other Philadelphia suburban counties. Doug Mastriano, I don't know how much he lost these counties by, but it was by a lot. And Trump is more similar to Doug Mastriano in terms of who he is and who he's likely to be, portrayed as on the campaign trail. Obviously, he will do better than Mastriano statewide, but the fact of the matter is he's going to perform very poorly in the Philadelphia suburbs, just like Mastriano did. And Mastriano lost by 15. Trump could do, 8% better in all those counties and still lose Pennsylvania decisively. So he has a path that is very narrow, and I think he's going to have a really difficult time getting Pennsylvania on his side. So I think that's a state that I think is looking pretty good for Biden, but not out of the picture for Trump. Another state I want to talk about here is Georgia. Georgia, I think, is the tipping point state for Biden. I think it's going to be bluer than the rest of these states, but you can make an argument for Arizona, which I'm going to characterize as well. But Georgia, to me, is really hard for Trump to win. He only lost it by 11,000 votes in 2020, but it's gotten bluer since then. Democrats did win the Senate race there in December of last year, not November, but they won it in the December runoff by around 3%. We also saw Democrats lose the turnout by a lot statewide. The electorate that voted in the runoff favored Trump by 5%, and yet they voted for Raphael Warnock by 3%. That means that there was an 8% gap between how they voted in 2020 and how they voted in the 2022 Senate race. And so what that means is that Republicans in Georgia are getting more Democratic. Again, there are voters in the suburbs who voted for Trump in 2020, likely didn't like him that much, but voted for him begrudgingly for whatever their reasons were, that are voting Democrat now. They voted for Democrats in 2022, and I would assume if it's a Trump versus Biden matchup, would vote Democratic in 2024. It's not to say Biden is like the best candidate or anything, but he is historically a good performer in the suburbs, and based on how Georgia's trending, it would make sense for him to do a lot better in the counties surrounding Atlanta because, again, he did, we saw double-digit swings towards him in 2020. They would likely repeat, at least to a certain, to an extent. Maybe, I think Cobb County swung 7 or 8 points towards Biden. It's something different than that, but I believe a similar amount. And so maybe it doesn't swing another 8 points towards him. Maybe it swings 5. But again, if you get 5-point swings everywhere surrounding Atlanta, those are a lot of counties. That's a lot of population. I think that was what makes it so hard for Trump to win Georgia because, again, it is just so left trending. So he would need to make up ground in the suburbs as well as see a drop in Democratic turnout. More than 2022, not likely. I think Biden is likely to win Georgia. Now, the good news for Trump is that I think he will win North Carolina. It's going to be close. I think it's one of the close states on the board here, but he will win it. And I say that because Democrats can't piece together a winning coalition in North Carolina. Like, to Democrats, North Carolina is kind of like, it's like a rival in sports that you always get close to beating but never can beat, right? Republicans have kind of owned North Carolina for the past decade. It's been because they've been able to just piece together coalition after coalition. Trump's going to do poorly in the suburbs. We know this. Biden's going to do better in areas surrounding Charlotte, Durham, Raleigh, Greensboro, as well as Asheville to an extent. And so the kind of red donuts surrounding the cities are going to get more Democratic. On the flip side, Republicans have a lot of room to grow in the suburbs. And when you look at the areas of North Carolina, specifically the areas that are like just have a lot of people, there's a lot of bright red exurbs. These are areas that have maybe 1 million people that are voting for Trump by 40 points in 2020 that I don't think are going to swing enough to the left to cut into that margin and to produce a Democratic victory. And so that is really important for Biden because he is very likely to do better in the suburbs, but not well enough in rural areas and exurbs to flip North Carolina. Because, again, he lost it by 2 points in 2020, which is a decent environment for him. He needs a lot of stuff to go right for him to win North Carolina this time, and I just don't think it's what I want to bet on. Arizona, I know I already filled in Arizona, but it's pretty similar to Georgia. I think for Trump to win Arizona, he'd need to do really well in the Phoenix suburbs, and, certainly possible, but not the most likely outcome. You'd also have to expect some sort of reversion towards Biden with Hispanic voters in urban areas. Again, Hispanic voters in urban areas are different, and they behave differently from Hispanic voters in rural areas. So in South Texas, Hispanic voters, I think, are less likely to swing towards Biden because they are less likely to hold a college degree. But younger Hispanic voters in an area like Phoenix or Tucson, a higher percentage of those voters have college degrees and are thus more likely to swing towards Democrats because, again, as we know, one of the more important rules in politics for the past 8-10 years has been voters with college degrees will swing towards Democrats. And I think that the same would go for Hispanic voters, which are, again, such an important voting bloc in Arizona. So I think between the suburbs and the voters in the cities themselves, you'd expect Biden to win Arizona by 2 or 3 points. Now, the final states are Nevada and Wisconsin, and I think right now they're tilting towards Biden. It's going to be close. I wouldn't be surprised if either of these states voted for Trump in 2024. But right now, I think Biden wins Nevada, for starters. I know I made a video talking about why I think Nevada is the right trending state. I still maintain that position. But I think at the end of the day, Biden, in 2024 at least, in a year from now, holds on to Nevada. Catherin Cortez Masto lost it or won it by a point in an electorate that favored Trump by, I think, 6% in 2020. And unless Republicans get a massive turnout advantage, the likes of which they've never seen before, it'll be an uphill climb for them in Nevada. Clark County, right trending county long term, I think will do just enough to stay with Biden this time, although it will be a reduced margin. Wisconsin, this is an interesting state. I was really wrong about Wisconsin last year. I've admitted to that many times. It's kind of ironic how wrong I was. I was confident Republicans were going to flip the governorship pretty easily, and they lost it by a decent margin. And ever since then, I've kind of held back on my Wisconsin takes because I think prior to November 2022, I was expecting Trump to win it by a couple of points. But ever since Tony Evers won re-election and Mandela Barnes almost beat Ron Johnson, which is still crazy to think about, I think I've had a bit of pause in that. And I think for now, Biden's favored. He won it by 0.7 in 2020, which isn't that impressive of a margin. But the thing with Wisconsin is that the WOW counties are trending to the left. And these are counties that are, have a lot of population. They're outside Milwaukee, and they're suburbs that Republicans have relied on to win every election that they've ever won in Wisconsin for the past 40 or 50 years. And these counties are trending blue. And in fact, in the Supreme Court election, which was in April, most recent election in Wisconsin, we saw Democrats, Democratic nominee Janet Protasiewicz, I keep mixing up the syllables, but Janet Protasiewicz almost won the, I believe it was Ozaukee, which is the northernmost of those counties. And so, again, county level data doesn't matter too much until it it pours in statewide. And Republicans need to win those counties combined by hundreds of thousands of votes, and they can't do that in 2024. Trump's so toxic in the suburbs that I think you'd expect Republicans to lose a lot of votes in the wild counties, even compared to 2020. And while Biden's going to do worse than he did, or maybe worse than Tony Evers did in the drift list, which working class voters, there are way more voters in the suburbs that will be offsetting that. So for every voter Biden would lose within the working class, he might be gaining 1.5 or 2 on average outside of the Milwaukee suburbs, or in the Milwaukee suburbs rather. So I think at this point in time, Biden is favored to win re-election by a pretty good amount. I do believe that Trump has a path. I think it's actually a viable path. But right now, Biden is absolutely favored. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next one.